Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome. This is another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today with some good news. I just released today some statistics that indicate that the inflation rate has dropped to 1.7%. In April. That was driven by lower energy prices. Now, just to put that in context, just about 6 weeks before that, the inflation rate was 2.3%, and we were wringing our hands, and justifiably so. Let's face it, that's what impacts our cost of living, how you and I have to spend every day, every week, every month to maintain a house, to buy groceries and things like that. So there's good news on that front. And the driving force that actually knocked that down, we're told, is because of Mark Carney's move to basically eliminate the carbon tax from gasoline. And, of course, the critics have been still on him. I mean, since the day he took over the Liberal leadership, it's, Carney, but. Somebody asked me in response to one of my blogs a couple of weeks ago, how much of the criticism about Mark Carney is legitimate and how much of it is really just partisan snipping? Well, as we say, politics, there's an old saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I would suggest that politics is in the eye of the beholder, too. You got a guy like Mark Carney who's, let's face it, his CV looks pretty impressive. This is a guy that graduated from Harvard, from Oxford. He's got business degrees. He's, head the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England. He's been on a number of different international boards with the G7 and others. If he had called himself a conservative, these guys would be building shrines to him in this country. My God, it's about time we had somebody like this running our country. But the fact that he chose to be a liberal, all of a sudden, the critics, which are often the people that populate some of the newspapers, radio stations, and television stations that make up the media here, are critical of this guy. And again, it's partisanship. That's really what it comes down to. As we've mentioned on previous podcasts, we as Canadians have to keep in mind the fact that most of and I don't want to use mainstream media because that's a BS phrase, but newspapers, those that are still print or even online newspapers, television stations, radio stations, most of them in this country are owned by actually only 3 or 4 major companies, all of them with a very, very strong small c conservative, maybe in many cases, small c conservative ownership. So of course they're going to espouse right of center politics and conservative politics, and they're going to be critical of somebody who's not conservative. That's really what it comes down to. All I'm saying is, I'm not going to say that they're right or wrong, although, let's face it, we make those judgments ourselves, but everything that you read, everything that you hear from a number of those papers, those media outlets, go through that filter, a conservative filter. And if it's not a conservative who's advocating something, oftentimes, their job is to be critical of it, period, end of sentence. It's a rather frivolous and juvenile way to approach journalism these days, but that's sadly the way that things are these days. Didn't used to be. There was a time, not that many years ago, when an idea, a political theory was really judged on its merit as opposed to the political stripe of the individual that put it forward. But that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in, and that's what we have to face. So we have to accept that filter and simply say, okay, so-and-so thinks it's bad, that newspaper thinks it's bad, that radio guy thinks it's bad, but is it really? Well, you judge for yourself based on your own circumstance, which leads me to something else I wanted to talk about today on the podcast. The numbers there are great, and we can say the fact that gasoline prices have gone down is good, although I could go off on a tangent about that too. It still bothers me considerably that, yes, the prices are lower than they were 4 or 5 months ago, but the way that the gasoline, the fuel companies, the energy companies play games with we consumers still gets under my skin. That all of a sudden you can pay in Southern Ontario here $1.12, $1.16 for gas, and then 3 days later it's $1.26, $1.27, and then 3 days later it drops again. Why do they do it? Somebody asked me that the other day. Because they can. Because nobody does anything about it. There's no regulation. They raise prices. They can do whatever the heck they want, and we as consumers are stuck with it. I mean, where else are we going to go, right? But that's another topic for another day. It's just something that we're going to be stuck with here, I guess, for the next little while. But back to the original premise here. What are governments going to do to help us get through these economic rough times? And make no mistake about it, we are in a dogfight here. And a lot of it has to do with Trump's idiotic tariffs. And we can talk about what we can do about this and fighting back. But the reality is, at the bottom here, where you and I live, we have to deal with it. You know, we can let the governments and this politician and that politician fight over this about how unfair they are, and hopefully they can find some sort of solution to it. But every day, you and I, whether we go to the grocery store or wherever we're spending our money, we're dealing with this, and it's having a negative impact. Just as we said that, for instance, fuel prices going down have had a positive impact on our cost of living, grocery prices continue to rise. And, you know, it's going to be a factor. Let's face it. We got to put food on the table for our families, and it's costing more. Vegetables, beef, and you name it, just about everything in the grocery store is going up in price. Is there price gouging? Well, a lot of people in politics seem to think so. I think there's a lot of suggestions, and I think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that, yeah, it does happen. I mean, we already know that these guys have been caught red-handed price fixing when it comes to bread, and you know, they paid a little slap on the wrist fine, but that was that. But, you know, if it's happening there, is it happening with other products too? Well, walk up and down the aisles in a grocery store and you tell me whether or not you're starting to see prices rise, and there doesn't seem to be any justification for it. But so we go back to our governments, whether it's provincial or federal, and say, what are you going to do to help us? When we're in crisis times, we look to governments for assistance, which goes back to what we were talking about in the podcast 2 or 3 days ago, I guess it was, that, you know, the governments should not be run like a business. So you want governments to be efficient, but governments are here to help us get through our everyday lives, not to simply, you know, save money and show a profit. We want them to be there when we need them. And right now, we need them for a number of different things. And in times of crisis, we look to governments. And when we had the pandemic a few years ago, I at that time praised the government, the federal government, for their initiative when it came to things like CERB payments, etc. I know that initially the Conservatives and Poilievre were against that simply because it's spending money, and they say, well, what's the benefit for it? The benefit's to us, to businesses, small businesses, and to you and I as individuals. If you lose your job or you're laid off, you want assistance right away. You don't want a tax credit so that 9 months from now, when you're doing your income tax, well, I can take $100 off that. You don't have that. If you want right now, what am I going to do? How am I going to get help to pay for my groceries this week? And that's what you're looking for. So the idea of a CERB program back in COVID, good idea. Did it go on too long? Yeah, probably. Was it maybe too lax in the parameters that were set up? Probably. But the intentions were good, which is why initially it was a great idea. Well, we're not quite into a pandemic, but we are into an economic problem area, crisis area here now, and we are going to look to governments for help. You look at, for instance, what the provincial government here in Ontario came out with their budget last week. And Peter Bethlenfalvy, who's the finance minister here in Ontario, said, you know, we're in this is an anti-tariff budget. I mean, we have to deal with the tariffs. And they have offered some assistance. Although I have question right now as to the wisdom as to whether or not this is being directed to the right areas. There is going to be some help, they say, for businesses that are going to be negatively impacted by Trump's tariffs. And that's okay. But they don't seem to be doing an awful lot for the individuals who are going to be impacted by this. People who lose their jobs, people who get laid off. And this is not a theoretical exercise right now because it's already happening. We've got auto workers that have been laid off. Shifts have been canceled at some of the plants. It's happening with other businesses too. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the government going to do, even on a short term, to step in here and to try to help? Well, the Ford government here, Minister Bethlenfalvy, have said that they're going to direct an awful lot of money to try to help people who lose their jobs or get laid off. And what they said they wanted to do, I was astounded when I heard the minister say this. They're going to put them in touch with other labor unions and other people who can direct them where they should be going. That's tantamount to simply saying, hey, too bad you lost your job there, bud. Here's a phone number. Call this guy. They might be able to help you. That's not helping. That's not the kind of assistance we need right now. We need somebody who's going to, at least in the short term, say, here's something to tide you over so you can at least keep your house afloat and you can pay for groceries. Maybe even, you can spend money for your kids to go away on a vacation this year, whatever the case might be. That's when governments have to step in. To do it over the long haul, of course, is not economically viable. But you want governments to be flexible. That's why I was amazed and somewhat disappointed with a number of people that have been critical of Mark Carney, when he announced, for instance, the fact that he was going to eliminate the carbon tax on gasoline. They said, yeah, but we read his book, which is right over my shoulder here. I've read the book too. And Carney does talk positively about carbon taxes and things like this in the book. But what he said at the time when he was all of a sudden Prime Minister Carney was that, That was then, and he still has ideas that there's some merit to this, but you have to change with the times. And this is a far different economic circumstance that we're in right now than was in place when Carney wrote that book. As Winston Churchill once famously said when he was questioned by a reporter, but, Prime Minister, you changed your policy on that. And Churchill replied, yes, those who cannot change nothing. Think about that. And that's what you want our political leaders to be. They have to be flexible. Yes, you need principles. Yes, you need direction. You need policies. But you have to look at the reality of what's happening right now and change if that change is necessary and if in the long term it's going to be helpful. And that's what we're looking for from our prime minister, from our premiers, and for our elected representatives. Can you be flexible? Can you show us that, yes, we still want to be going down this road, but we're going to have to do a little detour here because these people need our help immediately? And that's what we're going to be looking for. And that's what Prime Minister Carney is talking about right now. I'm open to give this guy a shot and say, look at the credibility that he's got in finance, the show that he's done with not just the Bank of Canada during our recession back in 2009, 2010, but of course dealing with the UK and Brexit. The guy knows what he's talking about. And he helped to put both of those countries, both Canada and, of course, the UK, largely because of Brexit, back on their economic feet. And we're looking for that to happen again now. I mean, criticism is criticism, and anybody who's in political life right now has to accept the fact that there are going to be critics. And I know Mark Carney certainly is getting some heat from some of the people in the right-wing media, which is most of the media these days. And that's fine. That, whether it's fair or not is inconsequential. When you're in that job, you're going to get the heat. And he understands that, I think. But what we have to do is sift through some of the criticism and the critiques from some of the people there and simply say, are they doing what they need to be doing to help you and me to get through what's going on here? And that's the barometer that you and I should be using to judge how well things are going. I mean, to be practical about this, the Carney government's been in power, less than a month since they got sworn in. It's only been a couple of weeks, and all we've heard is criticism about why is that person doing that? Why are they in that ministry? What about this? Let's see what they do. They're going back to work in Parliament in the next couple of days, and we want to see some action right now. He's talking about some plans. He already talked about a tax cut that's going to be in place. He's talked about reducing the carbon tax, eliminating the carbon tax. So far, so good. It's not enough, nowhere near enough to try to get us through what's going on here. And what we're talking about now might change within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're in a very fluid situation here because of Trump, the crazy guy in the White House, and some of the other global factors that are happening right now. And we need our prime minister and our politicians right across the board to be flexible. Like we talked about a couple of days ago, I think for the first time in a long time in this country, there seems to be a general mood between premiers and the prime minister and the federal government to show some sense of cooperation. And there's still going to be a partisan impact on this. And the Danielle Smiths and the Scott Moes that still simply want to stick to their theoretical and ideological things have got to have, I think, some sense of immediacy here to what has to happen and be flexible about this too. And if they're not, well, let's face it, I guess the rest of us just have to move on without that. But let's see some cooperation, and let's look at the policies that are going to be coming forward here, economic policies, and ask yourself, is that going to help us? Is that going to help us here in Southern Ontario? Is it going to help people in the steel industry, the automotive industry? Is it going to help the farmers out west? Because there's so many things going on here right now, and we want this government to work together, not apart, as seems to be the case with politicians these days. It's about time that we look for that sense of cooperation. And that's what's going to get us through this thing. And that's what we're going to be looking for from this prime minister and this government when they get back to work in Parliament. And it's also what we'd like to think that we're going to see from Canadian people, too, to say, okay, can we get through this thing together? As Carney has said a number of times, we're stronger together than we are apart. And we've got to keep that in mind as we go forward and advise each other. But at the same time, I think evaluate just what the federal government is going to be doing and how the premiers are going to respond to this as well. Everybody's got a wish list. But is it going to be Canada first or the province first? Because if it's going to be the latter, then it's going to be a long, long, messy economic future for the next little while. And we really can't afford that. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. Of course, you can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, certainly on YouTube, and so many different Blue Sky, so many other different platforms over the last little while. And we're so happy for that, and so happy for the feedback that we're getting from you on all of these policies, too. Until next time, thanks as always to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this podcast together. Lots more coming up in the next little while. Stick around and stay with us. This is the Bill Kelly Podcast, and in the meantime, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wissenz Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wissenz Law, 905-522-1102 or wissenslaw.com.